Hey, this is Pad of Team Me. What's coming up is a conversation that I recently had with Claire Dale of Companies in Motion. She is the co-founder of that company, and she is the co-author of an amazing book called Physical Intelligence. It's an award-winning book published by Simon & Schuster. And Claire and I only recently caught up, and what you're going to see is the first conversation that we ever had face-to-face over Zoom, and the things that we discussed as we began to look at the modes that are used in physical intelligence and the archetypal model that Team Me is based upon. We kind of went everywhere. We went into descriptions on flow states and other such things as well. So I think you may find this a rather lengthy, but hopefully a fascinating conversation. Get stuck into this. If you're interested in following up, look at companiesinmotion.com for Claire's amazing work on physical intelligence. Look out teamme.com for the archetypal model and the academy and the profiling tools that I provide also. Hope you enjoy it.
I was about to answer and start to talk about characters and archetypes and how it works that they create change so quickly.
Right.
So maybe, I mean, that would be a great place to start if you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear it from your viewpoint, because you've got the professional background, the proper training, whereas this to me is something I just stumbled into, studied a bit, tried it out, found that it got extraordinary shifts in people's performance, and then sort of codified it off the back of that, whereas you've come through the classic, the proper route. and then I'm no doubt have got your own insights and experience that have come over time. I'd love to hear your perspective on the whole business of archetypes and the changes that brings about in somebody's performance, really.
So before I do that, just tell me, what are the archetypes and how did you come across them?
Yeah, so of course there are hundreds of archetypes, and there are lots of things out there that people describe as archetypes and then not. They're stereotypes or some other type. So arc to me, like archaeology, it's got to be old. In fact, it's got to be so old that everybody gets it. And so I only work with universal archetypes. I built this, Jung bashed out what he did with the 4 archetypes back in whatever that was, 1910 or something. He first wrote that. Then he expanded them. Then he came across the I Ching and he started working with the 16 types, which was slightly different. And then people started looking at shadow states, etc. So it kind of multiplied and multiplied until Caroline Myss has got 125 and counting as far as I could see. And I know some people who've been trained by her, and there are wonderful insights there. I was most struck by the work of Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette, who came out with The King, the Warrior, the Lover, the Magician. And they were focused on the male archetypes, really, and looking at the ways in which they saw a lot of men becoming increasingly disempowered in society, either by their own peers who were just demanding something of them that they were not, or society itself that had begun this process of basically saying males sort of bring too much negativity and we ought to actually squash them down and see the women rise up. I fully agree the women need to rise up. I think there's a vital need for their capabilities and their perspectives, but I think actually we need to learn to work together. So I'm seeing 2 arenas. I do women's empowerment and I also do kind of men's empowerment, or rather men's rescuing kind of events. That's the way I see it. But I'm going round the houses because it was a long story. But when I looked at the work of Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette, I thought there's some missing pieces. Trying to condense anything down into 4 cubes, it's just a bit too much. And any of these profiling systems that attempts to do that, I just have a natural distaste for. Anything that blocks you into 4. It just seems a bit too reductionist. And so I thought, well, I don't want to do a Caroline Myss and have 125 of them out there. I can't remember 20 names, let alone 125 of them. I want to make it so simple that it works in primary schools. I want to make it so immediate that it works in maximum security prisons, but also doesn't lose the people on the board, although that's the hardest place for it to work because of the egos we often find at board level, where people don't want to admit vulnerability. I ultimately came down to 6 characters because I began to realize that Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette had defined the sovereign, the king, but they'd pushed into that character logic and said the king operates by logic and reasoning. And I said, well, sometimes, but not always. Richard Branson is definitely king over the Virgin Empire, emperor, plays the sovereign role, but doesn't necessarily make his decisions driven from a logical point of view. There are many that do. So I said, well, hold on, there's a Sherlock Holmes here, but Sherlock Holmes isn't the king. We need to separate these two out. So I ended up with the sovereign, then the sage, who is the Sherlock Holmes type, or Spock when it comes to Star Trek, and all similar, have a hard time accessing any sense of emotion and are purely driven by logic. But then the warrior is still definitely in there. So those, to me, formed a kind of little triumvirate. And then we do have the lover, but the lover's not just the romantic type, the caring type. Lots of profiles separate the two. I lump them together and say, if you care about people more than anything, that's the space you belong to. The mystic, who's able to transcend and transform, goes above and beyond the logic. And then the jester, you have to have the jester in there. And so what I realized later is that the first 3 actually form left brain character types, and the bottom 3 right brain character types. And then I began to realize, and I'll very quickly run over this, the reason for locking it down to those 6 is because of the interplay between them. The sovereign and the mystic both operate through a mode of operation driven by power, one by raw authority, one by influence, but it's power that links the two of them, which is why they often are drawn together. The lover and the warrior are both driven by passion, one more by compassion, the other by heat, force. And again, this is a straddling of the left brain to right brain capacities. And then the jester and the sage both operate out of perception. They're both known as clever, but for different reasons.
What was the word you just used then, Pat?
Perception for the last one.
Got it, yeah.
Yeah. So when I hadn't seen that until I was working with the model for over a year and suddenly thought, oh my word, this is why when you get those two together, they kind of have a mutual attraction, but also the sparks will fly because they're coming at the same issue from 2 points of view. And when I saw that, I thought, hold on, that means we've pretty much got a complete model here. And almost every other archetype you can imagine is actually just a blend of those 6 is what I'm essentially push out there. That, to me, gave me a working model. And I literally do go into primary schools. I've got 20 minutes in an assembly. How do you unpack this? Well, I not only unpack it and just say, here's my 6 friends. Let me show you how they help me in my life, but I get them coming up on stage and acting out some of these characters for all to see. And literally the transformations that you see in these little 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds is extraordinary. And the teachers just say, things have changed in our class since doing that 20-minute assembly, because it's not only powerful, it's memorable as well. And
yeah.
And then another way of me angling this, I usually say, let me introduce you to 6 of my friends. And you kind of know them, but you don't know them. But actually you really do know them, and I'll show you why. And then, so I unpack them. So these things are coded inside of each one of us. And this naming system is just a simple way of summing it up, communicating it, and then they can make of it what they want to. But I will then also bring up a few movies. And so The Lion King is a brilliant one for the kids, because you have the big poster, the movie poster up there, and you go, tick, 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 tick. Well, there's 2 jesters, and and that's it. 6 characters, 6 of these characters. Wham, it's in there. That's the model. Okay, go over to another movie, and you literally, there's slight variations, of course, but generally speaking, you can see that this is all that's in there. So who's the hero? Well, the hero is Hillman, James Hillman, I think it was, or was it Joseph Campbell? One of them delving into the hero. Joseph
Campbell, yeah, hero's
so
journey.
he did the hero's journey, but James Hillman then did archetypal psychology off the back of that and went much more specifically into it. Some really great insights from both of them, and also some real clangers from both of them. I won't go into. But there's, one or other of them based, and it probably was Joseph Campbell who said the hero is really just an immature sovereign. And so we major on the hero, but actually we need to see that as the context. And I will come in and say, yeah, okay, that may or may not be true. Let's look at the other balance. So one last thing, because I know I'm just rabbiting on my favorite subject here. The last thing here is that I don't go in and label anybody as one of these characters. I just bring in necessary focus to say, well, how are you showing up? How would you describe that? Okay, that's a bit warrior. Do you think that's going to get you the best result? Is there an alternative approach? But I also then bring in a profiling tool, which enables me to put mathematical measurements in all of 90 seconds. I get a full graphic equalizer view of how strong 0 to 10 with each of these characters are. And so once I've got that, I persuade a CEO to spend 90 seconds on my profiling tool online. I'll come back and I'll say, okay, so when you go into a meeting, this is the first thing you approach. After that, you'll move to this area. After that, you'll move to this area. I've never had any of them say it's inaccurate. And it's just because it's summarized it from a values driving point of view, wrapped up in these characters. And they don't even know about the characters when they're answering the questions. They're just answering values-based questions. And then it just gives that degree of insight in record time. And immediately then I can say, okay, then this seems to be the area that we need to focus upon. Let's start a conversation around that. And if that's appropriate, then we go into the warrior program to boost the warrior, the sovereign program to boost the sovereign, the lover program to boost the lover, and we access all those different areas and see those shifts take place. So that's kind of the model. There you go.
You use this in one-to-one coaching as well, Pat?
Yeah, so I started with one-to-one coaching. What I then realized is that actually to have a wider and deeper and longer lasting impact, well, no, that's arguable, but a wider impact for sure, is that when you work in teams and you have all of their profiles mapped out in front of you, it is so easy then to describe those relationships to the point that I don't need to meet a team anymore. They just need to all complete their profiles speedily, honestly, and then I come back and I just say, okay, let me describe the way your team operates. Let me describe the relationships between the CEO and the senior managers, or the senior managers and their reports, etc. And I can talk around that. These ones you get on well with, this one you've always found a bit too flippant, a bit too hard-hitting, a bit too stuck in detail, a bit too whatever, and I can describe all of those things just from their input that way. But yes, I've worked, I mean, it started with one-on-one work.
Yeah. Well, so I have done a fair amount of work on the embodiment of archetypes, and there are various linkages that I'm making to what you're doing. And the first thing to say is that physical intelligence really is its primary goal is to connect the head and the body, to connect the sort of, not to get out of our heads and into our bodies and vice versa, but to really connect the whole, integrate the whole human being. So I'm guessing this is also true in your framework, but every human being has an element of all of the archetypes in them.
Yes, absolutely.
And so there is the element, as you've been talking about, when the warrior comes forward and you said, and takes action. Is that going to maybe the best, going to get you the best result at this moment in time? And are there options? The idea that for each of us, as we do anyway, dial up and dial down certain aspects of our archetypology, is a great way to think about being a flexible, dynamic human being and having a system that we have agency over.
Yes.
And so with each of the archetypes, excuse me, I had COVID last week, so I've got a residual cough, but very mildly, but I still got that going on. Okay. So what we do is we look at the chemistry of how we behave as human beings. And we've got, we've identified, well, there are hundreds of chemicals racing through the body and brain at any one time, but there are a key 8 that play off against each other. And actually they're driving the behaviors of the different archetypes to put the chemistry into your framework. And it's like a scientific underpinning for how human beings work, how human beings behave, and it can go right into archetype work. And one of the chemicals that's very important to us all, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but it's dopamine, which gets the label of this is about addiction, need and reward, but actually it is so much more. It is everything to do with our motivation, literally taking a step towards something that we perceive will be of value, or a step towards, the first step on a difficult technical project. What's going to motivate us through? What are the elements that motivate us?
Yeah.
So motivation is a big topic, and also for dopamine, and also how we, it's very, very connected with the visual cortex of the brain, dopamine release.
Yes. Yes.
Incredible sort of whole brain body networking thinking. It connects all of our brains up, and of course we have brains in our hearts and guts. You'll know the cardiac brain, the enteric brain, and the head brain they play out in these archetypes, in fact. So with what I love about what this archetype work, and the way the way you clearly love working on this, and putting the embodiment, getting people to embody the archetypes, links right into the dopamine system, because we see an image, we feel it in our bodies, we're part of the story, and it goes right into the visual cortex of the brain and the other senses. What we hear, the sound of it, we believe it, we tangibly know it, and so it takes us out of cognition into a whole embodied cognition, actually.
Yes. Yeah.
So we understand it, we get it. And what I love about the dopamine function, it's like a flash. It's so strong when you are in a story. And that's why stories work so well, and how come this mythology has been passed down. So that's one connection. In terms of the warrior, in our work, we've looked at Myers-Briggs and the 16 Jungian archetypes and so on, and we've kind of we've looked at overlaying PI onto that, physical intelligence onto that. It just becomes like a soup of complicatedness.
Yeah.
And I like what you've done and added the archetypes, but we're quite, in terms of the physical integration, we're quite happy with 4 modes.
Okay.
And it seems to work. It's enough for us to get that feeling of being able to modulate up and down a scale of where we want our behavior to be. So the warrior I put it in the feet to begin with. It's a very grounded kind of stance, because the action forward, the action of the warrior to strike, to act, to enable, is to move from the feet, and you can only move quickly or move powerfully from a strong stance. So you're very well grounded, and that links to the very base of the torso.
Yeah.
So that's our motivator. Right at the base of our torso is where we drive our movement from. So if you imagine trying to move a piano, you're not going to be able to move the piano if your hips are way back behind you. Yeah.
I had to push my car the other day. We had an interesting situation with the immobilizer. And even with 2 of us going slightly uphill, and my first thought was, I've just got to get my feet into a good position and angle. That's where I need to start. If I can't achieve that, I'm not going to be able to shift this thing. It's just too heavy for me.
Exactly. So if a warrior is trying to slay a dragon like this,
there's
power, but the power comes from having the hips and the pelvis on top of very grounded legs, and the undercarriage very forceful.
Excellent.
That would be warrior, and that would be the chemical cocktail, or the components for the warrior would be very grounded testosterone for women. And I would make the archetypes. I mean, I identify with all the archetypes. I've never separated them gender wise. It's interesting that I've never felt the need to really.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the reasons for making the 6 come in as well, because there was no real place. Robert Moore talked about the magician, but the mystic is a lot more open than just that magician. I just felt it was too masculine in its approach as well. So yeah, I definitely wanted to open it, and that's why we use the sovereign. I talk to queens as queens, kings as kings, but generically has to be the sovereign, and there's a female warrior just as much as a male. So this is why I felt the universal archetypes, it's genderless, and that's very helpful these days. You don't need to address the gender question in any shape or form. You can just go in and say, this is deeper than all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, so testosterone, the warrior needs to be able to sort of have elevated cortisol, but deal with it and not let it get too, once you're under threat or under stress, then you're the sort of power of your movement as a warrior, you lose it. You kind of lose your head and you lose your ground, and then it just becomes about being in threat and panic. So we're very grounded and directional. So testosterone, cortisol are some of the main components. And then when you're talking about leadership, the warrior needs to have a very good level of oxytocin, which is released in the heart as well, and vary that, very of connection, because sometimes you need to hire and fire, and sometimes difficult decisions need to be taken, and we need to be able to lower the oxytocin enough to make those decisions that impact people, then re-elevate it quickly and speak from there to be able to communicate, to be able to make the best decisions rather than cutthroat decisions. And to be able to communicate them with compassion and empathy and so on.
That's fascinating, actually, isn't it? So the oxytocin is necessary to acknowledge and bond with the team, the wider, way more than me. I'm part of a system, and only oxytocin is going to enable us to actually play that out appropriately, to think the appropriate thoughts, to feel the appropriate feelings. But as you say, if you go into a firing meeting where that's necessary and you've got too much oxytocin going on, you're not going to do the job very well, are you?
No, and in fact, really, we're already starting to talk about a combination of two, the combination of the warrior and the lover.
Yes.
The grounded action and the heart of it is, a recipe for very successful leadership, like as is the combination. I think you were talking about combinations as well, of the magician and the magician and the sovereign, right? So you've got that, we would put, so the magician, we would put right in the belly here. This is a very high serotonin state. Serotonin is released by independent neurons in the gut, and there's lots of talk right now about the physiology of the gut and the importance of our serotonin for creativity, for happiness, for well-being, for a sense of status and importance in the world.
Yes.
Also, plays a big part in the suppleness of the connective tissue between the muscle and the bone.
Okay.
Serotonin does. So if you have a fixed, rigid body, your cortisol's too high and your serotonin will drop. So it's in order to be able to be flexible between the archetypes, but also flexible to collaborate and create, we need good levels of serotonin and oxytocin and the firing up of that creativity chemical, the dopamine, that can make connections. So that would be our take on the magician. And going to the mystic, I think when you get a sort of combination of the sort of quietness of perhaps the thought processes of the sovereign, where there's that sort of structured, really quite clear, precise approach to creating structure and form, is where you might get more of a mystical sort of combination.
So I see
and so on. Then you get to the heart of the matter. You get to the lover, and that is all the compassion and care that you've talked about. And then this is so vital. The head brain, the head brain connected to the heart. Was it somebody said the longest journey you might ever take is the 18 inches from the head to the heart?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely true. No, that's amazing, and it's lovely, just wonderful to hear you unpacking some of these things from that chemical perspective, because I've studied flow states quite a bit, but there's dynamics there, and there's things like DHEA, things which is a testosterone related chemical.
Well, DHEA is the precursor of testosterone and estrogen.
Right.
So in fact,
okay.
you know, you need all of the archetypes, all of the different modes that we would call them. So we would call them drive mode, swing mode, connect mode, and place mode.
Right.
Drive, swing, place. Yeah. So and even the way you say the words has very different dynamic energy. You can feel yourself in those different modes as you do the gesture or you say the words. And what we say, DHEA is necessary for all of them because it's a precursor of all of that powerful adrenal chemistry. Estrogen, adrenaline, acetylcholine, cortisol, all of that is that all of those adrenal chemicals are underpinned by DHEA. So if DHEA levels are too low, you know, you haven't been taking care of your adrenals, then the balance of the others will go, the others will go out of balance, and you'll find that you're suddenly having a spike in cortisol, or your heart starts racing with adrenaline, or you can't get enough recovery, or you've got too much recovery, acetylcholine, and your skin's not in the game anymore because you're just constantly seeking this recovery and you're back and you're very risk averse. It's like your foot's on the brake the whole time. So DHA is vital, and I'm happy that I don't meet many people that actually know about that chemical. So it's
I mean, I don't know enough about it. It's with my second book, Team Guy, I start speaking about the need for testosterone to get the job done. In my book on flow states, Extreme Me, I talk a lot more about the specific things you can do to raise testosterone, and with it do a balance, because testosterone gets a lot of bad rap these days, and yet it is so necessary to getting things done and to forcing things through. But as you're rightly pointing out, to over emphasize any one of these states, these modes, and the chemistry which is behind it, it's going to cause you problems if you don't achieve some sense of balance around those. So that's really wonderful to hear that, and it's a fascinating area. One of my friends is studying neurochemistry and all, and it is so extraordinarily complicated. The conditions that have to be met, the number of, you say, okay, there's a dopamine release. If you actually realize what took place to get that dopamine release, it's like a Einsteinian equation of this element leads to that, which spins this, which does that, which only if this happens, it goes like, whoa, this is so complicated. And yet at the end of the day, there are certain physical postures, actions, words you can speak that will trigger it like that. And that's where I go. I try to simplify everything. I'm not going to look at the real biochemistry. It's extraordinary. One thing to point out, I was actually realizing I'd never made this connection before. I had experientially realized this, but I hadn't put the two together. Is that you were talking about the warrior and adrenaline. And of course, the warrior can go the way, without the oxytocin being there, can go the way of get out of my way. I've got a mission, like I don't care about what, and if there's a distraction, they just blank to it. And the interesting thing about adrenaline is it physically actually does desensitize you. I was in a fight once and I literally was swiped. There's blood coming out the side of my face. And just afterwards, I realized, I felt the hit, but I didn't feel any pain. I literally did not feel any pain. And I'm looking at it afterwards thinking, how did I not feel any pain? And okay, cortisol maybe, but definitely adrenaline seems to do that job of actually stopping your senses from sending those signals to where they would normally go. And that is something of a warrior type action, isn't it? It's just like dulls the pain so that you can focus on the job at hand. And it is being blinkered. It's just single-minded to get that mission dealt with and done. And so we see that the neurochemistry actually supports that whole mode, that whole state as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's also so that you could, even if you're quite severely injured, you could run away from extreme danger and not feel the impact of an injury until much later. And then of course, there's the whole, the way that the adrenaline fires up the muscles. I mean, we've actually a spurt of adrenaline through the body into muscles makes them incredibly strong. But thankfully, we've got this mechanism where they're attached, and the muscles can't give us anywhere near the strength that they actually have.
Yes,
because they're anchored and they're paired and so on. But that is why, when you absolutely needed to, you'd probably tear some muscles. You'd need a lot of recovery, but you would be able to lift a car off your kid or whatever.
Yeah, and there's documentation about that, isn't there? So, wow, yeah, that's extreme.
How did you get into flow state? Tell me, give me like a 30-second version of your flow state for you. Can you do that?
What the flow state is.
Yeah.
But when I teach on this, I just give a series of examples, and I basically show that in a number of situations, the actual process is almost identical. So I'll talk about the musician who spends ages going through, like they're learning their instrument, they're playing scales. They go over and over and over and over until to start with, it's gritty, it's difficult, like a kid changing gears in the car. And eventually it just becomes natural, so that there's bodily encoding, there's bodily memory, whatever you call it, built in, and they can just do that. They just think it, they do it. And eventually they don't even need to think it. It just flows from that sense. But when it comes to the musician, they do their scales. And then when it comes to performance time, they've got themselves into such a state of ability that, yes, they still now need to perform on the day. So they're put into a rather unreal situation of having, 10,000 people staring at them and listening to every single note that they do. The pressure's on, but they've done all their rehearsal. They've done everything that they need to do. They're going over it in their mind. They're going over it with their body, and they get into that particular state. But there will be this initial kind of kick of adrenaline as the curtain rises. They will step in, and there'll be that few moments of, oh my word, what on earth's going on? But then there's the necessary trigger of timing, and they will just go in. And the good ones are already in a state where the flow is beginning to take place. The bad ones actually warm up on the first few notes. So they go in, and as they do that, usually it doesn't happen on the first note, but as they begin to play, they're playing their best. They are not just playing the notes they've learned, they've memorized, or they're reading off the sheet in front of them. There's a sense in which they feel a connection beginning to happen, and it rises and rises until there's a point where not only is the orchestra absolutely at one with them and the conductor, but the entire audience, the entire place just gets into a place almost of timelessness, and they sense that unity. And then off the back of that, they then have to kind of climb down, and we could talk about the coming down and the recovery, etc. But then if you look at skydivers, it's actually the very same process where they do the preps, they learn how to land, they do all the practical stuff, they check the chute, they do all the preps, but then ultimately they're standing at the edge and they've got to jump. And there's the adrenaline, wham, goes up super high. They jump, and for the first few seconds, it's mayhem. And then eventually the chute comes open, or they regain control in the air. And the same thing then kicks in. You get this big dopamine spike as there's the chase after the experience, etc. As you do the climb down, it's interesting. At some point, we'll talk about the depths of dopamine giving way to serotonin. But you've also then got those those spikes of gamma and the theta waves come in. There's gamma spikes taking place in people's brain patterns as well. And you've got anandamide kicking in. I didn't mention that with the creative thing earlier. If they're following a script, you may get that. But if you're in a place of improvisation, those things very, very often then kick in. And it's like, where on earth did that come from? The interesting thing is, because I teach on these different analogies to say, look, this is the flow state working out in these performance and it's performance whether you're being watched or not. But also, I have a mentor from the SAS, and he speaks about the same times that in operations, the SEALs talk about it as the switch. They're together for several hours, and then eventually, wham, they're of one mind. They are absolutely of one mind, which is why they keep it to 4 to 6 people. They don't usually have teams bigger than that. And they go into the switch, and they're in that state. And he said, in that state, there are times when they'll get a flash of inspiration on a mission. They'll do something, literally save another colleague's life. And they're like, how did you know to do that? How did you know that person was just came to me? I don't know. It just came in. And so these flashes take place. And then, okay, so that's the way I understand this. And there are ways to kind of artificially create this as well. You mentioned, pattern recognition and dopamine and all the rest come in when you're actually having to perform. I talk about surfing as well. And some of the things the surfers have just had the idea to do something, or they found themselves in a sticky situation and unconsciously have done actions which have saved their own lives. And it just came to them. Never been taught that, never read it in a book. Nobody has yet, as far as they know, ever had that experience before in their lives of those things coming together. But what they did saved their lives, and they would live to tell the day.
It's like what's coming to my mind now as a phrase is like, it's just, that flow state is about such a deep understanding of the physics and the nature of things, the nature of sound if you're a musician, the nature of the sea and the surfboard if you're a surfer. It's such a deep connection, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And so there's that famous sort of stir, selflessness, timelessness, and richness is the is the R at the end of it as well, where there's this sense of there is so much actually coming at you in those nature environments. If you're doing whitewater rafting or something, there is so much information coming at your senses, and you know that you can't process it all mentally. But your senses are picking up your 3 billion bits of information every second or whatever it might be. You can only process a certain number of those, but unconsciously you are actually processing the whole darn lot, and then able to take actions and decisions on an unconscious level. And that's when flow is really at its absolute beautiful peak there. But the richness of that experience almost, and this is where it's almost transcendental, it takes you, you're in a different space and you get a sense that you are one with the river, because there's all this stuff going on and you are processing it at an unconscious level. And that can cause its own problems when people come back to the real world afterwards. But those peak experiences are very much to do with our fact that we can't process that amount of info. And that also then leads to this sense of timelessness as well. That, when normally you don't get that amount of sensory input, not at that level of energy. And so you're not used to it. And since we measure time by our perception of change, or perception of time by our understanding of what's changing around us, there's just way too much of that going on. Too much information coming in at the same time. And you're literally taken into a kind of another perception of time, which if you're playing your violin might cause problems for the orchestra. So somehow you have to anchor yourself to that. But it's a fascinating state overall. So yeah, for some people, when we go into the personal coaching, we deal with all the other stuff first, but then we actually say, so what gets you into flow? And then we start looking at how to structure things so that you can actually have periods of maximum productivity and engagement, structured over your life. For those people who say they live in flow all the time, don't quite believe that, and I don't think neurochemically we can survive that. We have to have that restoration period afterwards. From my strongly mystical point of view, I can look at it from the elemental point of view. That's one thing I'd like to explore with you one day. the wind, the water, the metal, the earth, and light as well, that the mystics can vent the wind energy very quickly. Don't take that biologically. We can just vent out the energy very, very quickly. There's this huge push of dopamine which gets it all out there, and you can just exhaust yourself after an hour or two of that communication, of that application, because we're not bounding our energy, we're not holding it in, we're just letting it and it can be exhausting. You can be flat on your face. You need to know how to restore after those periods of time as well. Yeah.
Right.
And you know that territory better than me. I'm just experientially trying to get my head around best ways to do that, and I know a few things that work for me, and share those stories too.
Yeah. In terms of you, your coaching, your business, where are you going? What's your plan?
Well, my business is just to share the archetypal message and get that out to the world. I'm beta testing the Team Me Academy, which is an online teaching series. It's 3 levels at the moment, and it will branch into more later. But what it does is people do their profile in 90 seconds, and then the teaching program is then dished up specific to their archetypal character to some degree. So there's some generic material, but they also get some very specific stuff. Because you are strongest with Sovereign and Mystic, this is how I can explain how you do life, and therefore even as you go through this course, you're going to find this and this and this is appropriate, and we give them specific understanding of themselves. So the Academy is going to be a major thing that we are launching in the next month or two. So we're just getting that beta testing. But then I'm also majoring now on teams. So moving away from the personal coaching and more into the team coaching, and increasingly getting the word out there and engaging with corporate. So I've done some, and they've just been wonderful. The responses that we get, people just immediately get this stuff and immediately start making changes. And then as much latitude as they give me, we'll go deeper, etc. So I'm pushing with that, and I'm doing that particularly with tech teams or new teams that are coming together. And I explain to the manager, okay, so from this team, let me tell you how they will all operate. You don't need to spend 6 weeks getting used to these people. I'll tell you what's driving them or what you can expect from them. So it's very predictive in that sense, and it really helps them with engaging with that person in their conversations. So that's where I'm taking this over the course of this year in particular, is engaging there. And I've got several coaches who are saying, I want to be coached in this method. So by the end of the year, we'll have a certification program with the Team Me method, teaching the model, how to take this forward, etc. So every now and again, I get called. I don't go around chasing down speaking inquiries and things, but every now and again, I'm called in to help out with a workshop or do a speaking event and things as well. So that to me is where we're heading with this. And I just love engaging as recently as there's a guy who does masculine charisma coaching, and we did something together, and he's like, okay, let's plan that. So I also dovetail with a number of people who've got their specialism, and I bring this model in to complement that as well. And so those are the sorts of relationships as well that are beginning to transpire now. So I hope that sums it up pretty much.
Yeah.
Oh, good. And for yourself, is it more of the same for you, or what's your focus over the coming days?
Yeah, we are 9 months into having a 3-month online coaching course in physical intelligence for coaches. And I'm talking with a lot of coaches at the moment, inviting them to come and take part in it. It's quite, it's a beautiful 3-month experience for coaches who know that the body holds a very important key for changing behavior, but don't know how to access it or to introduce it and use it as a huge change, the huge change agent that it is. And so we're helping them to learn how to work with the body and integrate it into their practice. And that's brilliantly. We're selecting lovely cohorts that come together, trying to sort of get them from a similar background. So they've got a language already. They bring their own coaching theory. We're not teaching people to coach from a theoretical perspective, we're teaching people to coach with physical intelligence. So,
Right. Yes.
and that's really super brilliant and amazing. It was the beginning of COVID. We decided, okay, let's make coaches our market, because we obviously need to go online. Everyone, all of our traveling around the world to deliver training programs stopped.
Had to stop.
And I mean, we've really enjoyed the difference that it's made. And so that's that. But we've now also broadened our product range. So we've got a diagnostic tool that we're creating in physical intelligence.
Yeah.
And we've also got a primer now, which is just a 3.5 hour, get your body in, start to practice as your own physical intelligence as a precursor to the course.
Yeah.
And a whole range of other things. And then the other strand, like you, is that we are working with corporates, and some very big corporates, on team work, helping people understand what chemically is driving their behavior, who they are, and what their chemical cocktails like, and how to center themselves, ground themselves, get them into flow, get them into create the chemical cocktails that they need for various all the difficult things that leaders and senior teams have to do these days. And finally, I wanted to say to you, because I know you work with very technical teams, but we've had a huge success at various places, but Mars are currently using this.
Right.
It's what we've done is framed powerful communication in terms of the chemistry. So what's happening in you, what's happening in your audience when you are in communication with them. And so, of course, then understanding for a technically minded person to be able to the art of communication and its expressivity, a lot of technically minded leaders are challenged by that moment of communication.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we do is just unpack the science underneath it, what's happening on a chemical level in the audience and in you, and how can you bring the right variety to that? How can you really nail the storytelling to get the dopamine going in the audience? How can you raise their status and give them a sense of their own value and importance? Audiences need to feel valued. That's why you can't just people, So
brilliant.
Those are our things, and as probably with all of us, it's about scalability. How do we scale this business? We're doing what Daniel Goleman did for emotional intelligence 20 years ago. We are doing that for the body.
Yes.
Scientific underpinning and the research, 175 pieces of research at the back of the book, and a lot more where that came from. So it's and creating a brand. I mean, it's a big work we're doing, creating a brand that is physical intelligence. When people don't, what's that? So you are marketing something people don't know they want yet.
Yep. Exactly that. So
because that's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, it's a similar space. So I was talking with a non-exec director yesterday who was asking about, could this fit with what I'm doing and coaching? It's all very fluffy, and what is it that actually you do? And I said, well, forget what I do. It's what you get from it to start with. How I do it, I'll explain later. But for me, it's we're talking a lot about improving technical team communication, and they immediately think, oh well, if I just go to Trello or go to Basecamp or go to something else, and is there something better? And they talk about the system. I say, forget the system. I say, okay, well, you'll need to address that later. But I'm saying, look, however good your car is, if you've got a goofball driving, then you're not going to get the result that you're expecting. So it's who's driving it, and have they been taught how to drive appropriately for that type of road? It doesn't matter what car you give them, really. So that's where I go to, and they say, oh, okay, I kind of get that. So what is it you do? And I say, well, I'll explain the drives for the individual. What's driving that person's specific behavior, and how is that showing up? Because it doesn't matter about their skills and their knowledge, it's how they show up as regards whether they're going to be effective in that situation. And I've got a simple model to explain that. So it's like, I can't tell them what it is until I've explained how it's going to impact what they do.
And then they come back saying, so how do we do this? And okay, now let me give you a model which you won't ever forget, and that will enable you to step forward. So I think it's similar with PI, is that, it's like, well, what's the good of that? But if you ultimately say, it's going to get you those results of being able to have engaging communication, have you felt the pain of your engagement just dropping? Or you've said it, you thought you got it out there, but it just didn't land. Or maybe you didn't know that until a week later. Well, how about we do something to make sure that it does land? And this is how you do it, and in come all of your approaches and techniques off the back of that. I'm very aware of time. We could go off with that.
I think we would probably talk for about 3 weeks non-stop.